Hello and welcome to another episode of F1OWC Podcast Live. I'm your host Dylan Anderson, joined once again by three-time world champion Brandon Tanti. Welcome. Tonight we're going to be recapping the Chinese Grand Prix. Obviously, difficult weekend for yourself. Just give us, we're going to jump straight into it for a fast-track episode tonight. Just give us some feedback on your time in Shanghai.
It was contrast between two different races, I think. First race was pretty good, I thought. Although I did make a bit of a mistake coming out of turn 4 there, mid-race. Copped a bit of damage. And had the damage carried throughout the whole race. And it was found out later that Oscar also had a bit of damage as well, so could have been a potential win there, but credit to Oscar. He managed to pull the car through and get the win. Managed to salvage what I could for a second. And in terms of the feature race, that was a difficult one to, I think, swallow. Had a pretty good start, and then was going through the motions. Pit stop was good. Everything was working out well, and then unfortunately, making my way through some of the pack, and ended up getting caught up in a spin there at the last corner. Pretty unfortunate. It's hard to swallow when it's something that's effectively not your fault, but Fletcher did speak to me after the race and admitted that he made a mistake. It was his fault. So I accepted that, and just move forward. Move forward to the next round, which is Baku. So hoping to get something good out of that.
Yeah, it's ultimately a pretty difficult weekend for the Renault outfit in general, with Kurt Dunn there suffering some reliability issues with his connection, getting into the lobby throughout both of the races, ended up finishing in P8 in the sprint race and retired from the feature race on the back of a rather difficult Bahrain Grand Prix. It seen Kurt Dunn fall further and further down the championship ladder. Do you think there's room for some salvation there for Kurt Dunn to get his Season 12 campaign back on track?
Oh, definitely. I think the issues that he was suffering in China were a bit hard, especially when it's something that you can't control. He was on track to get some good points until some of the reliability issues and the connection problems he encountered started happening. So I've encountered that firsthand back in, I think it was Season 9 in Singapore, where I unfortunately disconnected from the lead of the race and couldn't get back into my own car. So eventually I think the AI car finished something like 6th. So it's hard to swallow when it's not your fault, but he'll be back. I think he knows he's got some good pace there, and he's spoken to him, and he's confident in his abilities at Baku. So hopefully he can be a good track for him.
Yeah, that's right. Obviously, reliability is something that's been plaguing Toro Rosso over the last couple of rounds, with myself in Australia and Bahrain suffering some issues with the brake pedal, where going down the front straight, and basically it felt like the brakes were coming on and it was shutting the DRS, and it was affecting my straight line speed, which ultimately plagued the result in Australia and Bahrain. And then obviously Shannon Mortlock, my teammate, had a similar issue in practice with his brake pedal, having an accident early on, managed to get back in for qualifying, but ultimately in the back of his mind having that that thought of, am I going to have the brakes going into this qualifying session or even the race itself? It's definitely a very distracting thing. So I can obviously sympathise for Kurt in regards to reliability, being able to get in. Is he going to be able to perform? Is it going to drop out? It's a very difficult thing to swallow. And as you said, you played that part in Singapore in Season 9. Myself in America, been in a position to lead the race, disconnected, and then because I was the host of the lobby back then on that game, the host was for some reason unable to rejoin their own lobby. So that is a very, very frustrating thing. Just a little recap on China for myself. Wet qualifying, obviously going into the weekend. Any kind of rain in China didn't really suit well with me because I don't particularly like the track. I find it very difficult to drive. It's one of those tracks where you kind of find you're either in the rhythm and you're on the pace, or you're not in the rhythm and you're miles off the pace. So to rock up in intermediate conditions, I think, as challenging as it was a good equaliser. Obviously, we saw Shannon Mortlock take the pole position at the dying moments of qualifying there, which was great for him. P5 for me, so it was a good start for Toro Rosso. For myself, a little bit of a slow getaway. Obviously, I rebuilt my brake pedals in the build-up to the race over Saturday. I took it all apart, rewired all of the harnessing because trying to negate that issue that I was having in Australia and Bahrain. And I took the clutch pedal out and moved the brake pedal over a little bit because obviously with the central steering column coming up between the legs, it was a little bit awkward. So a new pedal position for me. Reliability is now back, which is great, and ultimately, P5 in qualifying is fantastic. As I said, a little bit slow to get away in the sprint race. Got caught out by Oscar Grant, who started alongside me. He had a bit of a moment going into turn 1. Managed to miss some damage. Went to tuck in, get the crisscross. Mitchell Collins threw it up the inside, and I ended up losing both places to them. Safety car, Harry Ryan, very unlucky. DNF in both races due to wheel issues. One, his wheel disconnected down the back straight. And then when he turned it back on, coming into the pits, basically he had no pedal and he just drove straight into the wall and retired from the session, which is very, very unfortunate for him given the strong season he's had up to this point. Obviously, a lot of his championship contenders around him in the championship standings gained a lot of points and moved ahead of him, so it moves Harry Ryan down into P8 of the championship. But his safety car in both races actually kind of went against my run of luck, unfortunately, as I started on the medium compound, and lap 2 and lap 4 into a 14 race Grand Prix didn't enable me to basically put on a harder or softer compound to run to the end. So I stayed out under safety car, which is fantastic. Got to lead the race for the first time in the season 12 campaign. Safety car restart. I haven't done one of those from the start again, which is fantastic. Pitted on lap 10 for the soft tyres. Come through the pack. Ended up passing 4 people coming out of the pits in those last 4 laps. Finished P5 in the sprint race, picking up 10 points, equalising my finish in Australia, which is fantastic to bounce back from what happened in Bahrain. And then ultimately backed it up again with a P6 finish behind yourself, Brandon, picking up another 8 points. So 18 points for me is a good day. In comparison to season 11, at this stage in the championship last season, I'd only had 2 points to my name. Currently, I stand dead even in P6 with my teammate, Shannon Mortlock, on 44 points, which is fantastic, considering that he's got a pole position and a podium. So, clearly showing that consistency can, put you in good places in the championship.
Well, definitely in a better position than you were last season, so it's positive.
Yeah, that's right. And coming up to a couple of Grand Prix, which I'm looking forward to. It's a very exciting part of the season. Now, traditionally, the first sort of 4 races have never really been a strong race for me. If you go back into the earlier days, it was Australia, Bahrain, Malaysia, and China was your first 4. They traditionally weren't very good for me, even in my championship winning seasons, and it was pretty much from like Spain to probably Singapore was the good part of the season for me. So going into Baku, which is a personal favourite for me, I do love my street circuits, Monaco, Singapore alike, and then going into Spain, which is obviously spiritual home of winter testing for us. Obviously no winter testing for this season because we're using the same game that we used in season 11. So what? Just gonna have a look here at the results from China. Massive points for Rocket Williams Racing in the Chinese Grand Prix round, with Austin Smedley bouncing back from a difficult Bahrain Grand Prix to pick up P3 in the sprint race ahead of Ryan Lowe, behind yourself, Brandon Tanti. What do you make of Austin Smedley's result in the sprint race to bounce back from such a difficult weekend in Bahrain?
It's always great when you bounce back like that and pick up a podium. I think he was pretty thrilled with it. As per some of the predictions I laid down last week, so it was it was good to pick one. Yeah, but I think his performance over the past couple of races has been really good. I think he's been a little bit unlucky at times, particularly in Bahrain, the feature race, what happened to him there. But yeah, just to come to China and really bring the heat and come in and pick up a P3 is, it's great news for the team. Especially when both drivers are firing on all cylinders. They're doing really well. So it's good. I think the competition is really spurring them both on to pick up some solid points. And I think they're both playing the team card really well. They're both really aspiring to get constructors for Williams this season, so it's looking really positive so far.
Yeah, absolutely, and I think it's really fantastic to see the Season 3 constructor team be in a position where they've got their marquee driver with Mitchell Collin there, partnered up with Austin Smedley, which is a proven race winner, proven pole position finisher, and what they're doing in Season 12 of the F1OWC is absolutely fantastic for them, and ultimately to be there when it matters most, pick up the podium, try and minimise damage and the risk. Obviously Ryan Lowe in the sprint race there found himself down amongst the back group of the guys, so he finished P4 ahead of myself. But ultimately, as I said before, with the comparison with me, Shannon Mortlock, that the consistency is definitely paying dividends for the guys over there at Williams, and backed it up again in the feature race, which was massive. And I picked a podium finisher with Mitchell Collin in the Williams, and the fact that both Williams drivers got on the podium in the feature race, after being hunted down by Shannon Mortlock in the dying parts of the race, they were able to hold on to P2 and P3. Unfortunately, take a little bit of the spotlight off the race winner and championship leader Ryan Lowe, but the gravity of that podium finish, really has to be sort of seen to be believed. Like the last time that Williams had finished on the podium was at Russia in Season 4 with Mitchell Collin and Chris Patajak, and I currently am the only driver on the grid other than Mitchell who had raced in that race. It was over 165 races ago. So to think that they've gone through, in seasons past, like with yourself, with Ryan Lowe, Alex Babluis, there's been drivers that have come in and been real development drivers, but then they've moved on from Williams. So to see some good guys come back to Williams as a pair, get on the podium, make some history. I think regardless of what Mitchell Collin and Austin Smedley do in Season 12, I think they've already made history and rewrote the books at Williams.
100%. I think the partnership they have is very strong, and I don't think it's something that anyone would have expected coming into the start of the season. But look at them 3 rounds in, pretty much up there as a team in constructors and really fighting for it. I think that teamwork is showing off, them both working together to figure out, say, race strategy and how they're going to go about qualifying is really paid off.
Yeah, absolutely. I was speaking to Austin Smedley, who's going to be our featured driver on the Friday podcast, and he was saying that 50% strike rate in terms of podium finishes so far in Season 12, with 3 podiums out of 6 races. Obviously, in Season 11, out of the 42 races last season, he'd only had 4 podiums, so he's pretty much already matched his total from last season. It seems to be on track to have one of the stronger seasons of his career.
Oh, definitely. I think they're both in a very positive mindset. Him and Mitchell as well. Picking up that race win in Bahrain. Very underestimated partnership, but it shows that if mistakes are made, they're both there, to pick up maximum points, like what has happened, or even in variable conditions,
Mm.
showing that they have the skill and driver ability to bring the car home and bring some solid points, back to the team.
Yeah, absolutely. And talking of bringing points back to the team, Scuderia Ferrari in the Chinese Grand Prix, fantastic points haul for them, especially Steve Shadlow picking up P7 in the sprint race, banking 6 points. With Fletcher Sermon, unfortunately, finishing outside of the points due to some damage after contact with with Shannon Mortlock at the later stages of the race there, which Shannon picked up penalties for. But then they were able to back it up with Fletcher banking some points in the feature race. How do you think this kind of result for Steve Shadlow goes in terms of sort of changing his mindset, which may have been a little bit negative towards the back end of season 11? Do you think this points finish will spur him on to do well in the races coming forward?
Oh, for sure. I think looking at their progress, I think going through some of the races, especially most recently, I think the momentum is there. I think the momentum will keep going, and especially when you pick up solid points, it's always a good momentum builder to keep pushing to do
Mm.
better. So, maybe putting in a bit of extra practice, or, making sure that they are preparing, more adequately for races is paying off for them.
Yeah, absolutely. And also another interesting sort of stat to take out of China is Rich Energy Haas F1 team picking up their first double points finish of the season, with Mitchell Hayward finishing P8 in the feature, banking 4 points. Ben Matchett picking up his first points of the season 12 campaign, his first for Haas. Obviously, a bit of controversy over maybe Ben Matchett's driving standards in China. There was obviously some statements made, after the sprint race by Mitchell Hayward and Shannon Mortlock. Some contact going into, or the exit of turn 5 at the hairpin there. Um, Obviously, there wasn't enough footage to bring forward to sort of, give out any sort of justified penalties. Do you think that this double points finish for Haas is proof that, even these guys' racing standards might be a little bit questionable at times, that they're able to bank points and do the job when it comes knocking?
I think so. I think it's more a case of, like, the driving standards in themselves, can always be fixed with practice. And I think as long as you do more practice, it puts you in a position to compete, at a higher level. Um, Racing clean, it's not always possible, sometimes, but for the most part, you can control, what you do on the track.
Mm.
So as long as you're aware, you have a greater awareness of the cars that are around you, and where you are relative to everyone else, you usually put yourself on track to pick up some good points. And it's encouraging for Haas to pick up double points, especially Ben Matchett, only being new here. He's sort of solidifying himself as as a serious driver, to be taken seriously
Yeah,
amongst the
that's
paddock.
right.
So
And I think too, in terms of being consistent and being there to capitalise on your opportunities when they come knocking. Ben Matchett's a couple of retirements this season, but ultimately at Kurt Dunn and Harry Ryan's expense in China, Ben Matchett was able to pick up his first points. But having said that, was on the back of a DNF in the sprint race. So ultimately, the opportunity may be there, but you still got to be able to execute the result when it matters. And I think it's really good. I think it's positive to get off the mark. Ultimately, I was there last season going into Bahrain. 3 DNFs and I think a P11. So no points for me. And it was, it's difficult, and it makes you kind of eager to want to get those points. And that's where some mistakes end up coming through. But I've opened up the questions to the guys in the chat here. Obviously, Mitch Collin just making note in the feature race, finishing P3 on the podium after taking wing damage, which put him in last place at the start of the race. So ultimately, I'm assuming the lap 2 safety car fell into his favour there, but ultimately to come back from, effectively P13 and make up 10 positions and finish on the podium is testament that you can overtake cleanly in the reverse grid races.
Oh, 100%. I think credit to Mitchell to bring the car from where he found himself in the first initial laps to a podium position. I think I was able to show that I was able to do that in the Bahrain feature race. Essentially getting spun at the start and making my way back. But safety car does, effectively help. It's a good equalizer, brings all the field together again.
Yeah, that's
but
right.
Then again, the pressure's on for you to make up all those positions again.
Yeah.
So you're in a position where you have to think about how hard you attack, how aggressive you are, but also thinking about being respectful on track. But he's done really well to make up so much ground and to pull a P3. Just like we discussed before, I think it brings us back to how well Williams are doing as a team.
Yeah, well, that's right. They've just got that, that belief within themselves as drivers and within the car underneath them to pull good results when it matters. Another question here from Austin Smedley. He goes, what do you think of the consistency of the lot of drivers this season and how close the field is? I think, again, as we've said over previous podcasts, that the consistency and how close the group is in season 12 is phenomenal. Other than Trent, who's taken a leave of absence for personal reason, we've had 100% attendance rating. That's half the battle, is trying to get people to turn up.
Yeah.
And the fact that we've got everyone here and everyone is within X amount of gap, and potentially anyone in the top 10 could finish on the podium on their day, and if the opportunity comes knocking and they're in the right position. Ultimately, I think that it's fantastic, and it's testament that, the guys like, Mitchell Collin, Austin Smedley, Oscar, Shannon, yourself, Ryan, all these guys can just pop up, take podiums. Kurt's taken a podium, potential race win there in Australia. It's really, it's anyone's game, and that's why, we had to sort of, address those comments made by Ryan Lowe in Bahrain that, it's not a 2-horse race in season 12. If yourself get some bad luck, Ryan gets some bad luck, we know that after Canada, after that contact with Trent and the fallout after that leading into Austria, the momentum that Ryan had in that first part of the season was really strong. But after that incident in Canada, it kind of fell apart until towards the back end of the European rounds. So momentum is a really important thing in winning a championship and, trying to, reduce those poor finishes. But at this stage, I would have to say that, yes, okay, McLaren is doing really well. But in terms of, a team, I think, Williams have the constructors' momentum at the moment. Yeah, and I'm going to come out there and say it's a bold call because obviously, Oscar's won a race, Ryan's won a race, but ultimately they've also had low finishing races as well. I know Oscar's performance especially has been a little bit up and down in his race results. He can get on the podium, he can do well, but ultimately it's those races where he's not on the winning pace is that he's got to try and minimise. And again, it's the same with Kurt. He proved in Australia that he can finish on the podium, he can win races, but the 4 races after that in Bahrain and China have been really, really poor. Now, China wasn't his fault, but to be, what is it? He's on 39 points to Ryan Lowe's 110 after 6 races. Like, that's going to take a phenomenal effort for Kurt Dunn to be able to pull that back, and to be in a position of, driver championship contention. But I think Austin's question is absolutely valid. That the competitiveness of the grid in Season 12 is fantastic, and I'd very much like to speak to Austin more regarding his sort of development over when he's joined the series in the past. Obviously, he's won races and got poles with Ferrari. He was my teammate briefly at McLaren. So that development that he's made within himself has led to the grid being as close as it is this season. Another question here from Ryan Lowe. Thoughts on McLaren's up and down results? I think, I pretty much touched on that myself. I think, for sure, you'd be a fool not to put McLaren down as the favourite in the Constructors' Championship. 187 points, 47 points ahead of Renault already. 57 points ahead of Williams, and 99 points ahead of Toro Rosso. So I think McLaren are still favourites to win the Constructors, but again, like I just mentioned before, the races where you're not on the pace, you'll have to minimise the damage effectively. It's not, and again, I touched on it in Bahrain about the reverse grid races, especially in the wet races, that it's not about coming from the back of the grid to the podium. It's minimising the amount of, points lost that you may take. You break a wing, you're going to be finishing lower lower in the points. I think Oscar got lucky in the feature race, P7, 6 points, but he picked up the fastest lap, which was good for him. What's your thoughts on McLaren's sort of, as Ryan said, up and down season so far?
Yeah, I think them being in the lead doesn't highlight some of the inconsistencies, especially with Oscar himself. What happened in Australia, but if you look at it, on the face of it, they are still winning. The partnership is still very strong between both drivers, both very solid drivers, both proven race winners. But yeah, I think, just I guess touching on what you were saying, consistency does play a strong part, but there's also an element of the unknown when you go into feature races. Like you said, you might go into a feature race thinking about how you want to execute it, but once you're in the race, things don't always go the way you expect them to go, and it's about having that judgment, and the snap calls that you make in a race, going for overtakes or defending, that can make the difference between scoring more points than you thought, or scoring less points than you expected. But yeah, they are still leading, but hopefully they can. I'm sure they're managing to be more consistent for the upcoming 3 races and for the rest of the season. So we'll see. We'll have to track their progress as it goes.
Yeah, ultimately, I think, that's pretty good. I sort of poked the stick around in the paddock chat earlier in the week, and Ryan come out and said, no, look, we're on equal terms at McLaren. There's no one driver, or number 1 driver, number 2 driver. I think that's fair, and for the most part, up and down the grid, or the paddock, I should say, that most of the teams are pretty happy with an equal partnership. Obviously, there's only been a select few times in the F1OWC history that there have been 2 potential race-winning and championship-winning drivers within a single team. One partnership that sticks out for me is season 4, with Brenton Ross, Mercedes. Both in a position to do well, win championships, win podiums, we're on the podium nearly every race. But ultimately, it come to a point where, not both drivers can win the Drivers' Championship. At some point, you're going to have to become a little bit selfish if you're going to want to walk away with the big prize. Do you think at the moment this harmonious partnership at McLaren has the ability to sort of fall apart once the season starts to get a little bit tighter?
It's very hard to sort of guess whether or not that will happen, but it's very high potential that it could happen. I've been in a position where I was partnered with Brian Cruz, which he is also, as most of the grid knows, is a proven race winner. He's won 2 championships. He's proven that he can be the best on his day. With myself, and as you go through a season, particularly in season, I think it was 8, you get to a point where you have to think about, how much do you want the Drivers' Championship? What takes precedence? Do you want constructors more than drivers, or do you really want drivers? So, what are you pushing for more? What is it? Sometimes it's about not having both, or you may have the benefit of having a lead in the constructors, so it may free up both drivers to compete more freely. But at the same time, you won't always have that freedom of information, I guess, amongst both drivers. In my experience, like myself and Brian didn't always share the same information. I think we're both a very competitive pair, so both wanting to win. It was very hard to collaborate to try and get the best result for the team.
Yeah, absolutely. And back in season 4 with Brenton, we got to a point where we'd had sort of team orders in place for Monaco in the wet, which I'm hoping, fingers crossed, it's not Monaco in the wet in season 12. But it gets to a point where I'd withheld information in terms of setup based on him going against those team orders that put us both at risk for that race in terms of retirement, ultimately winning the championship in season 4. As you touched on, your partnership there with Brian Cruz, obviously in the season 8 championship, how much do you think withhold?
I don't think it contributed too much. I think it was more so like he know how to prepare for a race, so I don't think for the most part he needed a lot of my collaboration when it came down to it. I think it was more the small things, like how we're going to go about strategy and things like that, things you may want to discuss before a race, when you want to pit and things like that, sort of go out the window, and you're kind of there for yourself in the race because you're just hungry for the win. It's some of the small things you may withhold, and they can end up becoming bigger things. But I think for the most part, with my experience, Brian was a smart enough driver to know how to win and how to get the most out of his driving experience in the car. So
Yeah.
it was just, I think it was more of a competitive fight between me and him towards the end.
Yeah, that's right, and it played out, and obviously the best driver ended up winning in that particular season. We're going to move on to Baku. Obviously, is the first of our 3 races for this week coming. Debuted in season 7, a personal favourite of mine. I was in the Haas in season 7. Endured a crash and a rollover in practice, which was become a bit of a trend for the seasons to come, which is fantastic. Yourself, Brandon Tanti, picking up the inaugural win on the streets of Baku for Williams. Do you think that's a good sign for the Williams boys moving into this week?
It could very much be so, knowing that they've had a win there before. Looking back on my win, it was I remember even before the race started, qualifying itself was an interesting one. I think I picked up a big toe off I think it was Tom Freeman, which basically
who was in the manor at the time.
Yeah, cemented myself the pole.
It was by some margin from memory. I can't exactly recall the gap, but I know it was absolutely phenomenal. And I think you were down in the second sector, but then you were like 4/10 up in the last due to that slipstream.
Yeah, that toe it gave me quite a lot of time. So yeah, it gave me the benefit to start from pole, and basically from there, it made my job a lot easier. I didn't have to overtake. I was essentially in control of the race. So just making sure that I was monitoring each lap as it went and the tyre wear, and staying away from the walls essentially, because it's very dangerous on that track, especially in sector 2. I think, as everyone else knows.
Yeah, the castle
Um,
section is probably one of the difficult parts of the circuit, and I think probably one of the harder parts of any track that I've ever been on. I know Monaco is the hardest track, but in terms of a single corner, I think that castle section is quite fast. It's quite tight. It's uphill qualifying. It's very easy to make a mistake, and if you're pushing someone to for them try and force the error, the one place you don't want it to happen is at the castle section, because obviously track's blocked, you get a broken wing, potential retirement yourself. So it's always cautious when a cause for concern, I should say, when you're following a car into the castle section. But it's been proven that it can be done.
mm,
But season 8, Brian Cruz picking up a win for Mercedes, making it a Mercedes and Williams powered engine for the first two races in Baku. Then Nathan Mazzolo picking up a win for Sauber, which was under very interesting circumstances. Obviously, it was on the back of his Canadian Grand Prix, because the Baku races after Monaco, Canada, and that. And, Nathan Mazzolo had rocked up in Canada, raised the bar half a second, and everyone was like, like, how are we going to raise our own pace that we already thought was the limit, raise it half a second? And that was phenomenal. And it was a front row lockout for Sauber with Wayne Hames in Canada. And
yeah,
then
I believe so.
and then
Yeah.
Nathan picked up the pole in Baku. I qualified second, which was fantastic for me. Ultimately ended up sort of pressuring Nathan into a spin in the start of the second sector, which caused him wing damage. I think it was on like lap 3 or lap 4, and he did the rest of the lap with no wing, boxed, went for the hards, and obviously they were the super soft, or whatever they were. He went on the medium compound, the white strip ones, and he ran the whole race, and he actually caught me in the last sector of the race, on the final lap of the race, and he passed me to win the race. And I was absolutely fuming that someone could crash at the early parts of the race and then recover on the slowest tyre and then effectively get me on tyre degradation. And it was unfortunate because I was never in a position to contest the Baku Grand Prix again. Obviously, with Brian picking up the win for Ferrari in season 10, Shannon picking up the sprint race win for Red Bull in season 11, and then yourself, Brandon, picking up the win for Ferrari in season 11. So yourself, 2-time winner, Brian Cruz, 2-time winner, Shannon Mortlock, 1, and Nathan, 1.
Yeah, I was going to say, yeah, despite the victory at the start of, the last season of my career, I've had a few troublesome races at Baku. So I think I DNF'd. I think it was in season 9. Got too close to the wall at turn 2, I think it was. Just clipped it, and yeah, wheel was gone there. And I think in season 10, I think also turn 2. Yeah, got spun round there on the first lap, ended up in the wall. Nothing I could do about it, but
well, that's the nature of the circuit, isn't it?
yeah.
Pretty much, from lights out, it's straight into a 90 left, and then a short sprint into a 90 left, and then another 90 left. Like, it's very tight, especially with everyone bunched up so early, looking for those, those cheap overtake moves, and ultimately 3 cars into one doesn't always work. Unless you're Mitchell Collin throwing it up the inside at China turn 1, then, perhaps he might be onto something there. But speaking of Mitchell Collin, he just said, hey, do you guys have any advice on fixing his qualifying pace? He seems to be really struggling in qualifying, always been on the last 2-3 rows. Now, ultimately, Mitchell has proven that he can be a race winner, podium finisher in Season 12. He is in the early stages of using ERS manually. Do you want to just touch on the benefits that you feel using ERS manually as opposed to auto?
The benefits of using manual are tenfold, especially in a qualifying scenario. I don't know how many people in the grid know, but hot lap will not give you full deployment for the whole lap. You'll actually run out of ERS before you get to the line.
And you
So you
lose
probably
more straight line speed once it runs out, eh?
so you'll actually lose maybe a couple tenths just from that.
Mm.
So it's more effective to manage it through modes 3, 4, and 5. In particular, using modes 3 in traction areas to get better traction out of corners.
Yep.
And maybe bumping it back up, and then you could use some of the overtake down the straights to get a bit of extra speed.
So 3, 4, and 5, you're referring to high overtake and hot lap.
Yeah, they're the modes 3. Yeah, is high, 4 is overtake, and then the 5 you got hot lap, which essentially you really only use in qualifying. It's not particularly a mode you want to use in the race because you'll basically burn out your whole deployment or your battery within a lap.
Do you want to touch on vaguely, if you can, on the difference between hot lap and overtake? Like where should you use either?
So hot lap, you'd probably use it in every zone outside of traction zones and straights. Traction zones, you'd be wanting to use high.
Yeah.
And then bumping it back up straight away, probably to hot lap, and then on straights you'd be wanting to use overtake because it actually is faster down the straight than hot lap.
Okay.
It gives you an extra, probably say, it depends how long the straight is, but especially at Baku, it'd probably give you an extra tenth or two down the straight.
Well, I think Baku is very unique because ultimately, even though the straight is effectively shorter, it's made up of the sequence of corners prior to that coming onto that that whole chain, and that momentum out of that last sort of 90-degree right-hander is critical, as you said, using that overtake function and getting a good lap.
Yeah, and especially using high in traction zones really helps minimize the wheel spin coming out of corners, especially at the start of the lap when the tyres might not be up to temperature. If you've just started it, the tyres might be a bit cold, the brakes are cold, so you really need to make sure that you're maximising the best exit out of each corner, especially when you have 90-degree corners where it's slow in and then you're trying to maximise exit fast out. And there's so many of them on that track, so you just got to make sure that you're doing the best you can. It's a lot of moving up and down the modes, which is tricky, but once you master it, it's so easy. It's so easy to do, and it becomes second nature.
That's right.
And the benefits you get out of lap time are, you never want to, go back to auto.
Yeah, absolutely, and hopefully, if he's already been able to pull out the results that he is doing, with minimal ERS usage, I think, once he gets his head wrapped around that, I think he's going to be a force to be reckoned with. And ultimately, race pace is what pays the points, and it's working well for him at the moment. Harry Ryan's just mentioned, there you go, thoughts on his wheel making it to the Baku Grand Prix, as we touched on earlier. He had double DNF in China with wheel problems. I think he's touched on in the paddock chat that he reckons that it may be down to the vibrations caused by his force feedback that may be causing some issues there. Do you think that might be down to the age of the wheel, wear and tear, maybe a fault within it? Do you think?
Well, what is the wheel that he's currently using?
I'm actually not too sure what wheel he's using, to be honest.
Because me personally, I had a T300. Was the first wheel that I had, which I encountered.
And the same with me as well, yeah.
Yeah, towards the back end of its life, I encountered a lot of issues with losing force feedback, purely because once that whole unit started to overheat, it would actually, it would
start
lose
skipping.
its function.
Yeah.
It would lose its function to provide you with the actual proper force feedback that you needed. So
well, he has commented.
Yourself...
He did say, yes, it is. It's a Thrustmaster T300.
Oh, it is a T300. Yeah. So, me personally, I've encountered some issues with it. Losing force feedback. I've never had a pedal issue besides. Actually, I did. I've had a pedal fail before, probably due to just wear and tear. the pedal, I think, ended up losing its position, so the pedal wouldn't come back to its original position. So I had an accelerator that would get stuck open. So I'd be moving through corners and, essentially wasn't slowing down in time. I had to replace that. T300. Yeah, it's tricky.
He said this is the first problem that he's had with it in 4 years. Obviously, 4 years is a good stint, depending on how much he is using the wheel. I know me with the experience of using the Ferrari attachments for the T300 in Season 9. I pumped through 3 attachments, just burnt them out. But we were learning no traction control for the first time in Season 9, and we were doing probably, I reckon, over the course of the game, probably maybe 500-600 hours. And we smashed that game, and I just burnt through the attachment. So ultimately, it would be an absolute shame if this problem carries over to Baku for Harry Ryan, because as he proved in Australia, he can do really well, can get podiums, and I'd hate for his season to be derailed due to reliability.
100%.
Well, we're going to move on to the weather draft, because we're already 50 minutes into this podcast. It's absolutely flying today. We could sit here and talk all day. Everyone's engagement on the chat here has been fantastic. And just before we segue, segue into the weather draft, and we're talking about wheels and vibrations, I'd just like to do a massive shout out to Oscar Grant's wheel. Now, I was in a party chat with him at China practice, I believe, and it sounded like a wooden train carriage. Like, it had so much vibration. It was the absolute worst wheel I'd ever heard, and he'd actually moved the microphone away from it, and it was horrendous. So that's fantastic. Thank you for that experience. But we're going to move into the weather draft for Baku. As it was detailed last time, we will be doing the draft for Baku, Spain, and Monaco. So on Friday we won't have a weather draft. Obviously we'll have Austin Smedley on, and we'll do some stuff with him. So we're going to jump straight into the weather draft for Baku. Practice will start. Heavy rain. Ooh. That's what you want. Not really, not on a street circuit. And again, another track that we've had limited rain running there. I know I did a sort of hopper lobby or a 5-lapper race online with some randoms. I think you and I did it, and we just carved up. But, that's just because we're, superstars at the F1OWC. So practice will finish light cloud. So heavy rain to light cloud for practice in Baku. Qualifying, which is what matters. If you want to get on pole position, have a good race, stay out of the carnage. Where would you rather qualify, Brandon? The front or the back?
Oh, definitely pole, I'll tell you that.
Yeah. All right, qualifying will start. Clear. Yay.
Clear.
And it will finish light rain.
Ooh.
So another mad dash to get out of the garage in qualifying.
Yes.
Well, if it's anything like Bahrain, the rain's going to come really quickly for in the transition. Sprint race is going to start heavy rain. Oh my god.
Heavy rain.
And finish in light cloud.
Very much like practice.
Yes, but, at least you guys aren't going to be able to do a bloody no-stop on inters. Bloody hacks, mate.
Oh, come on.
Alright, and the feature race is going to start clear and finish overcast. So a dry feature race.
Okay.
So mixed conditions there. What's your thoughts?
Again, I think like China, I think qualifying is going to be very tight. It's going to be a run at the start. I think everyone's going to be a mad dash at the start to to get out and get some clean air to do your lap.
Mm.
Um, it's going to be interesting who can do it, and get out first. I had an issue in China, especially getting out. I think I ruined my first lap, which cost me, I think, the best conditions to be in to set a good lap. But yeah,
well, like Kurt, I dropped out in practice and just managed to get back in time, but I missed that first sort of minute and a half of being able to get out and get that proper intermediate conditions.
Mm.
Alright, so we're going to pump through the weather here for Spain. Practice will start clear and remain clear.
Okay.
So clear practice for Barcelona. And qualifying will be light cloud into overcast. And the sprint race will be clear for both.
Okay. Too clear. So the whole race will be
clear and clear. So far, a clean Spain. Or clear Spain, I should say. And the race the feature race will start clear and finish in light cloud. Wow, okay.
Completely dry weekend.
Well, that's going to be refreshing.
So clear to, what was it?
Clear to light cloud in Barcelona.
Light cloud.
Yep.
Okay.
Harry Ryan's sending his love for the weather gods in Barcelona. He's loving it. I think it's
I'm
difficult.
with you, buddy. Don't worry.
I definitely think the wet weather over the last few rounds, as painful it has been for a lot of in terms of, we've been seeing Williams and those guys doing really well. All right, Monaco will start practice in clear.
Okay.
And this stream is still working. Practice will go into light cloud. Qualifying will start light rain.
Okay.
And finish clear.
Ooh.
It's going to be a mad
wonder if the conditions will dry up enough for clear conditions. For dry tyres at the end.
Yeah. Well, that is true. Ultimately, you're going to want to hopefully set a banker lap. On the intermediates, providing that you don't end up binning it.
I think most people will set a banker lap. It'll just be more about getting in the pits, and being ready, hopefully right at the end to set a lap. Hopefully on dry tyres.
Well, I think ultimately too, it's going to create traffic as well. Which isn't, again, ideal. Where are we? Okay, so sprint race for Monaco. Start light cloud and go into overcast conditions.
Dry so far.
That's good. Now, the feature race for Monaco is our 250th Grand Prix since we started on the 24th of September in 2013. So that is massive milestone. And to do that, I think it was suggested by Fletcher Sermon that we will run it as a night race, which is going to be interesting for that first night race at Monaco, something different. And let's pray that it won't be raining. And it will start off light rain. Light rain night reverse grid race. Yes, boys, get in. And it's going to finish in clear conditions.
Okay.
Absolute savage. But it's a yes from me, and Brian Cruz has put up a F for his sign of respect to the weather gods of Monaco and for all of the coming races.
Okay, yep. So for Baku, practice at Baku, it is starting in heavy rain and will end in light cloud conditions. For qualifying, it will start in clear conditions and end in heavy rain. The sprint race at Baku will start in heavy rain and end in light cloud. And for the feature race, it will start in clear conditions and end overcast. Okay, moving on to Spain.
Yeah.
Practice at Spain will start in clear and remain clear for the whole session. For qualifying, it will start in light cloud conditions and end overcast. For the sprint race at Spain, it will start clear and remain clear for the whole race. For the feature race, it will start in clear conditions and end in light cloud. And for Monaco, practice will start clear and end in light cloud. Qualifying will start light rain and end in clear conditions. The sprint race will start in light cloud conditions and end in overcast conditions. And for our 250th race under lights, for the feature race, will start light rain and end in clear conditions.
I think that race is going to be absolutely savage. Nighttime Monaco with the spray of intermediate tyres. I think it's going to be absolute. But that pretty much will conclude today's episode of F1OWC Podcasts Live. We are out of time. I'd like to thank Mr. Brandon Tanti for joining us once again today.
Thank you.
And
thank you everyone for tuning in as well.
Yeah, absolutely. We got over 43 comments in the stream today. I think it's fantastic. Engagement is great. And, thank you guys all for tuning in. As I said, Austin Smedley on Friday. Best of luck to everyone in Baku in Spain. And we'll speak to you guys again before the 250th Grand Prix in Monaco.